class. Okay, we're ready for chapter 27. Over the next several weeks, I learned to stay away from Victor. Most of the time this was easy, and as I was chained to a post in the backyard and Victor never approached me. Often I could see him though, sitting by a window in the kitchen, smoking and drinking. Sometimes at night he would come out into the backyard to urinate, and that was about the only time he talked to me. "What you looking at, dog?" he'd shout at me. There was never any happiness in his laughter. The days grew warmer, so for shade, I dug out a scoop of earth between the sagging back fence and a machine that sat in the sun. "Dog got dirt all over my snowmobile," Victor yelled when he saw what I'd done. "Thing hasn't run in 2 years," the woman Lisa screamed back. They yelled at each other a lot. It reminded me a little of when Mom and Dad would get angry and shout, except that at this house, I'd sometimes hear a thud and a cry of pain, usually accompanied by the sound of bottles knocking together and falling to the floor. A nice old lady lived in a place behind the rotten wood fence, and she started coming over to talk to me through the gaps and holes in the boards. "Such a nice doggy. Do you have water today?" she whispered the first really hot morning. She left and soon reappeared with a pitcher from which she poured a cool stream of water into my dirty bowl. I lapped it up gratefully and licked the thin, shaking hand she extended through the fence hole. The flies buzzing around my stools landed on my lips and eyes, driving me a little crazy, but mostly I didn't mind lying in the backyard as long as I could be away from Victor. He scared me. The malevolence flowing from him communicated a real sense of danger. I was reminded of Todd and the man with the gun who hurt Jacob. I'd bitten both men. Did that mean I would someday be biting Victor? I simply could not believe that my purpose in life was to attack humans. It was beyond unacceptable. The mere thought made me sick. When Victor was not home, I would bark and Lisa would come out and feed me and let me off the chain a little bit, but I never once barked when he was in the house. The lady on the other side of the fence brought me little pieces of meat, which she poked through the hole. When I caught the meat as it fell through the air, she laughed with real delight, as if I had performed an amazing trick. It seemed the only purpose I really had, bringing a little bit of joy to a mysterious woman whose face I couldn't quite see. "This is a shame, a real shame. They can't do this to an animal. I'm gonna call somebody," she'd say. I could feel how much she cared about me, though it was strange because she never came into the yard to play. One day a truck pulled into the driveway and a woman got out dressed just the way Maya used to dress, so I knew she was a police officer. For a moment it felt as if she had come to fetch me to find, because she stood at the gate at the backyard and stared at me, writing something down. That didn't really make sense though, and when Lisa came outside, her hands on her hips, I lay down. The police officer handed Lisa a piece of paper. "The dog's just fine," Lisa shouted at her, really angry. I sensed the old lady standing behind me, just on the other side of the fence. She was breathing quietly while Lisa raged. That night, Victor yelled about me even more than usual, the word dog popping up every few seconds. "Why don't we just shoot the dog?" he yelled. $50 for what? We're not doing anything wrong." Something crashed in the house, a violent noise that made me cower. "We have to get a longer chain and clean up all the poop in the yard." "Read the ticket," Lisa shouted back. "I don't have to read the ticket. They can't make us do a darn thing. It's our property." That night, when Victor came out into the yard to urinate, he put his hand out to steady himself against the house and missed tumbling to the ground. "What are you staring at, stupid mutt?" he mumbled at me. "Take care of you tomorrow, not paying any $50. I slunk down low against the fence, not even daring to look back at him. The next day, my focus was distracted by a butterfly who was flittering around in front of my face, so I was startled when Victor suddenly appeared before me. "You want to go on a car ride?" Victor crooned at me. I didn't wag at the word. Somehow he made it sound like a threat instead of a treat. "No," I thought, "I don't want to go for a car ride with you." "It'll be fun. See the world," he said, his laugh turning into a cough that caused him to turn and spit on the ground. He unclipped my chain from the post and led me to his car, yanking me around to the back of it when I stopped at the door. He inserted his key and the trunk popped open. "In you go," he said. I sensed his anticipation and waited for a command I understood. "Okay," he said. He reached down and gripped me in the loose skin of the back of my neck and above my tail. There was a quick flash of pain as he hoisted me up, and then I was in the trunk, sliding on some greasy papers. He unsnapped my leash and let it pool on the floor in front of me. The lid slammed down and I was in near total darkness. I was lying on some smelly, oily rags that reminded me of the night of the fire when Ethan had hurt his leg, and some cold metal tools, so it was hard to get comfortable. One of the tools was easily identifiable as a gun. The acid fragrance was unmistakable. I turned away from it, trying to ignore the sharp smells. I lay in a half crouch, my nails extended in a hopeless attempt to keep from slipping from one side to the other in the narrow trunk as the car bounced and swayed. It was the strangest car ride I'd ever had, the only one I could remember that wasn't any fun. Still, car rides always resulted in a new place, and new places were always fun to explore. Maybe there would be other dogs, or maybe I was going back to live with Wendy. The cramped, dark space soon became quite warm, and I found myself thinking of the room I'd been placed in with Spike, back when my name was Toby and I was taken from the Senora. I hadn't thought about that scary moment in a long time. So much had happened since then. I was a completely different dog now, a good dog who had saved people. After I spent a long, miserable time in that trunk, the car began to vibrate and ping, and dust rose up in the air, a thick, choking cloud. I sneezed, shaking my head. Then the car braked to a sudden halt, sending me crashing against the inside of the trunk. The motor didn't shut off, though, and we sat for a minute. Oddly, as soon as we stopped, I could sense Victor inside the car on the other side of the trunk. I could feel his presence. I had the distinct sense that he was trying to make up his mind about something. There was a feeling of indecisiveness. Then he said something sharply, a word that was muffled. I heard the front door open. Victor's feet crunched on gravel as he came around to where I was laying, cringing. I smelled him before the trunk popped open and the cool air whooshed in around me. He stared down at me, blinking. I raised my eyes to his, then looked away so he wouldn't think I was challenging him. All right, he reached down and twisted at my collar. I expected him to attach my leash, so I was surprised when the collar itself fell away, leaving behind it an odd sensation, as if I were still wearing a collar, only one light as air. Get out of there now. My legs were cramped as I stood up. I recognized his hand gestures and jumped out of the car, landing awkwardly. We were on a dirt road, long green grass waving into the sun from both shoulders. Grit from the road painted the insides of my nose and settled on my tongue. I lifted my leg, looking over at him. What now? Victor got back in the car and the engine made a loud noise. I stared at him in confusion as his tires bit at the road, spitting rocks. He turned the car around, pointing in the opposite direction, then he rolled down his window. I'm doing you a favor. You're free now. Go catch some rabbits or something. He grinned at me and took off, the car kicking up a huge cloud of dirt behind it. Baffled, I watched it go. What sort of game was this? Hesitantly, I followed, easily tracking the dust as it drifted through the air. I knew from many years of find that I was quickly losing the scent. Victor must be driving very fast. I gamely picked up the pace, no longer following the dust cloud, but focusing instead on the signature smells from the back of his car, where I'd just spent so much time. I was able to track him when he turned onto a paved road, but when another took me to a highway with cars flashing past at amazing speeds, I knew I'd lost him. So many cars were whizzing by, each one with smells similar to, though not exactly like, Victor's. Picking out the one scent on which I was doing fine was impossible. The highway was intimidating. I turned from it and headed back to the direction I'd come. With nothing else to do, I backtracked along the same scent trail, now faint in the late afternoon breezes. When I came to the dirt road, though, I passed it and kept heading aimlessly up the pavement. I remember when I used the trick my very first mother had taught me and escaped from the kennel when I was a puppy, the second time. How it seemed like such an adventure to run out in the open, free and full of life. Then the man found me and named me Fella, and then Mom came and took me to Ethan. This was nothing like that. I didn't feel free. I didn't feel full of life. I felt guilty and sad. I had no purpose, no direction. I would not be able to make my way home from here. It was like when Colonel turned away from me, the day Derek took me to live with Wendy. Though no feelings came from the Colonel, it was nonetheless goodbye. Victor had just done the same thing, except he had handed me to nobody. The dust and heat made me pant, my thirst itching at my mouth. When I picked up the faint scent of water, it was the most natural thing in the world to turn in that direction, leaving the road and walking through high grasses that tossed themselves back and forth in the breeze. The smell of water grew stronger, more tantalizing, drawing me through the stand of trees and down a steep bank to a river. I waded into my chest, biting at the water, lapping it up. It felt glorious. With my urgent thirst no longer my only concern, I allowed myself to open my senses to my surroundings. The river filled my nose with its wonderful damp smell, and along with the gurgle of the waters, I could hear very faintly a duck squawking over some imagined outrage. I paddled along the bank, my feet sinking into the soft soil, and then it came to me with such a jolt, I lifted my head in surprise, my eyes wide open. I knew where I was.